السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. So this is our 6th lecture of this course, the revival of religious knowledge, or the revival of knowledge. I apologize, it's the title of the course, but the title of the book, or the title of the encyclopedia that we've been reading together is The Revival of Religious Knowledge, which is written by Al-Imam Al-Ghazali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and we've been going through the first book of this encyclopedia, which talks about knowledge, or the book of knowledge. So far we have covered 3 sections, and we're moving to the 4th section today, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Could I ask you guys if you could come this way a little bit? You guys too? That'll be much easier. Okay, so if you guys remember last time, Imam Al-Ghazali radiallahu ta'ala anhu have been talking to us about what is considered to be beneficial knowledge, so to speak, or blameworthy knowledge. Knowledge that is sort of harmful to the person. And we have went through the reasons why Imam Al-Ghazali has been tackling this notion, this idea, and then he also sort of divided the types of scholars into scholars who are of al-akhirah, or those who would take or would lead people to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those scholars who are more or less indulged into the desires of this worldly life. Okay. Imam Al-Ghazali left off where he's supposed to talk about this idea of debate, or intellectual debate, or what is known in Arabic as al-munazara. And Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala anhu will talk to us about, in the beginning of this section, he will talk to us about why did this feature of intellectuality or of Islamic academia, why did it rise? Because during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we haven't witnessed, as far as the narrations that come to us, the companions were not really involved into these sort of debates. There were discussions, more or less, but formal debates, whereas there's somebody who's supposed to be declared a winner, or somebody is declared a loser, or somebody who's declared as the person who holds the truth, and the person who has committed false reasoning, or something of that sort. These sort of debates were not really present during the time of the companions, and perhaps were not really present also during the times of Al-Tabi'een. However, at the time of Al-Tabi'een, it was somewhat present in terms of debates or arguments against Al-Mubtadi'ah, those sects or groups that were opposing the mainstream Sunnah, so to speak. The Tabi'un used to, the pious predecessors, the followers of the companions, used to engage into fierce arguments actually against them, defending the Sunnah, explaining what the Sunnah is all about, and at the same time paying attention to these harms, because al-bid'ah, the innovation in belief. And here innovation has a bad connotation. It's not a positive connotation, because innovation in technology perhaps has a positive connotation. But when we say innovation in belief, hinders the stability of faith in the Muslim society or in the Muslim individuals. Alright, so the idea was the companions were not really involved into formal debates. Arguments in the religion were not really present. Actually, whenever something like that would happen, the Prophet ﷺ used to warn them from that. And then the Tabi'un only did that for a reason, which was to retaliate or confront or respond to the shubuhat, to the doubts, to to refute those doubts that were used to be posed by al-Mubtadi'ah. Otherwise, debates were not really present. So how come during the time of Imam Al-Ghazali, during the 4th and the 5th century, how come debating became a pillar in the Islamic academia? It was supposed to be, or back then it was supposed to be as something that is fundamental, something that is important that a scholar be involved in. For you to be a scholar, you have to be involved in some kind of rigorous debate and argumentation process. Imam Al-Ghazali sheds light on aspects that perhaps are not really apparent for many scholars of his time. Their argument is, through debate, through argumentation, new opinions, new proofs rise, appear to us. Because when you're thinking by yourself, you can think of 1 or 2 proofs, 3 proofs, you can think of a certain idea from different aspects, but you would never encompass all proofs and you would never encompass all aspects. Through that process of debate and argumentation, going back and forth, trying to beat one another in opinions or in certain thoughts, things or perhaps knowledge come about from this process. It rises from this process. So this is their argument, okay? Debate moves science forward, moves academia forward. Because if we only accept ideas that are common and we don't debate them, we don't argue against them, then there will be some kind of stagnation in intellectuality. But we want things to iterate. We want to elaborate on ideas and opinions and describe different contexts of things and different approaches for ideas and thoughts and opinions and so on. This is their argument. This is the argument of the theologians. This is the argument of the jurists as well. So Imam Al-Ghazali gives a different dimension. He's telling them, actually, debate did not rise because of this reason. Because, see, this reason was perhaps present, so to speak, during the time of the companions and during the time of the pious predecessors. Because both of them also wanted to move knowledge forward, wanted to elaborate, wanted to learn more, was looking for a thorough understanding of the religion. They wanted to deepen their comprehension. They wanted to grasp the aspects of the religion. They wanted to grasp the aspects of the religion in a much more firm, with a firmer grip, so to speak. So they also were interested into expanding their knowledge, and yet they did not use this tool as a way to expand their knowledge. So Imam Al-Ghazali, because of this reason, he is confronting the jurists and theologians. He's saying to them, look, this is not the real reason why you're doing debates in the way you guys do. There's another reason behind that. And then he starts by giving sort of a historical overview of what was going on during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and then in the times of the great caliphates. And here Imam Al-Ghazali, he does not, in our terms, he does not give it, and he does not state the reason explicitly. But when you analyze the text, you will find him saying it implicitly. But back then, in the rhetoric that was used in the time of Imam Al-Ghazali, he's saying things pretty much straightforward. But see, and this is very interesting. Sometimes when you read traditional texts, because you're reading with the mindset of the modern day, you got used to the reading newspapers perhaps, and you believe things would be stated in a very straightforward manner, even though newspapers don't really state things in a straightforward manner. But anyways, the language of today's world, things, people find more interest in saying things more directly, rather than using different tools of language to explain something or to illustrate something. So Imam Al-Ghazali gives a historical overview. He says that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, debate in religion was not really present. At the time of the caliphates, from Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu until Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala and so on, the caliphates themselves were knowledgeable. Actually, they were mujtahideen. Each one of the great caliphates, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Uthman, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhum ajma'een, they had two authorities in hand, so to speak. One authority is the power, leadership, governance. And the other authority is the authority of knowledge, because they were the most knowledgeable. So there were no separation between the legal aspect of governance and the managerial leadership part of governance. In other words, the legislative aspect of government and the executive aspect of government, both of them were present in the same people who were actually ruling. Okay? So in other words, the ruler of those great caliphates were not really in need to seek power from scholars. Rather, they would only need companions to help them expand their view about some issues, take their opinions, look for their advice. But there were no separation between the power of knowledge and the power of management of leadership. They were both in the same people. That it was not separated. Only after that period, when later on rulers became perhaps maybe experts in leadership, if you want to say that. But on the other hand, they don't have a real solid knowledge of legal aspects in the religion, or laws, or verdicts. So rulers who at the same time are jurists, somewhat. On the other hand, rulers who have no idea or subtle idea about jurisdiction. So what do they need to do? They need to govern, right? And they're governing a nation that holds up religious values and rules to a very, very, very high regard. The rulers need to do what? Need to keep the structure and the order of society intact. They need at the same time to judge to carry on daily life. You need judgments, you need courts, and you need things to match the law, the fiqh of Islam. So what do? They start looking for help, seeking help from whom? From jurists. Alright, do you notice the separation here? In the beginning, they were seeking help they're seeking advice, more or less. The great caliphates, they were seeking advice. But now, or later on, not now, like not today. Later on, the rulers were actually looking for what? Looking for a legal authority. They don't have it. It's not with them. It's not like they're looking for advice. They're actually looking for somebody to govern or to carry on the legal governance, so to speak, under their supervision, under their executive command. And this created a tension, a hostility, a dynamics actually, because now you're bringing knowledge against or versus power, authority, ruling. And now you have a conflict of interest. Back then, that conflict of interest was not there. The great caliphates did not have that conflict of interest. The society acknowledges their knowledge, their high regard. The companions know that those caliphate are actually the most knowledgeable of them. So there were no conflict of interest of anything or anything of that sort. And actually, they sought the advice of other companions, even though they were the most knowledgeable of them. But now you have a ruler who is seeking to have a firmer grip of ruling the Muslim nation, by bringing scholars closer to their regime. In order to do what? In order to fill the gap that they as rulers have, which is they don't have the knowledge, enough knowledge to carry on the legislative authority as the greater caliphates used to do. Okay? Because of this, the dynamics that evolved out of this reality was conflict of interest. A ruler wants to do something, but the jurist says no. Or vice versa. The ruler is not doing something, and the jurist is saying he is obliged, he is mandated to do such and such. So now you have a conflict of interest. And of course, when you have that conflict of interest, what happens is that the human desire invests in that conflict. You know, sometimes, have you ever heard this notion of, you know, people who become wealthy during wars? At wartime, some people become wealthy. What do? They invest in the conflict. They turn the urgencies of people into things that they can benefit from. Or they fuel conflicts and they gain money from that. So the idea, I'm not saying the jurists were doing the same thing, but the idea is that the human desire invests in such conflicts, all right? Sees this conflict or such conflicts as an opportunity to gain wealth sometimes, to gain pride or prestige other times. So now, if you have a ruler saying, we want to do so-and-so, and you have a jurist saying, no, you can't do it, some other jurist will come up and say what? You know what? I believe that in my point of view, according to my proofs, you can do it. So then, there became this competition, who is closer to the ruler and who is not. Okay? How did that happen? Who would get closer? They compete, right? And those jurists are not necessarily appointed just because they would serve the mere desire of rulers. That was not the case either. I mean, the rulers back then, they would not say, you know what, okay, we will appoint those who will, who will obey. That was not the case necessarily. But the idea is that could be implicit in some contexts or some situations. But the idea was, rulers would select jurists who would be close to them. More than others. And part of that selection process, where if you were famous in academia or not, if you had some kind of a public followers, people had followers to you, you had some kind of public impact, you have an impact on the mass public or not, and things of that nature. In other words, being a social icon, even though, so it's not only being specialized in a certain branch of academia, but also having some kind of iconic presence in society. How did that iconic presence be accomplished at that time? Through debates. Some scholars would win, others won't. That is not necessarily because the person who would lose the debate is less knowledgeable, but rather it was, in actuality, it was an indication that the person who won the debate he has much better debating skills more than the other, not necessarily has more knowledge, or that he is in fact correct in what he has established during that argument or during that debate. But it was all about who can win debates, who can have more prestige, so to speak. So Imam Al-Ghazali is saying, this is the real reason why debates occurred. Debates occurred because competition between jurists evolved. Out of what? Out of separation between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And yet, the executive branch always had an upper hand in appointing a legislative branch. Okay? So they would compete for whom to be appointed. Okay? This is what I just said to you guys, or explained to you guys, this is pretty much a summary of what Imam Al-Ghazali is saying. Alright? Argument, intellectual debates did not rise merely for the academic purpose of advancing arguments or opinions, but rather it was a method, or was what should we call it? A tool for selection, because you have a pool of jurists. How would you select from them? I'm not saying that rulers, and also Imam Ghazali is not saying that rulers ordained or they asked for these debates to occur. But because of the competition that was there, they found the need. Why are you closer to the government and not me? I am more knowledgeable. Who says you're more knowledgeable? Well, let's debate. See? Now you got the idea. That was not during the time of the Caliphate. And Imam Al-Ghazali says something which is extraordinary. He's saying that you might tell me, this is almost the words of Imam Al-Ghazali, you might say that these debates were of great importance and were of great help for the reality of knowledge in Islam. Because out of these debates, many of the opinions that were perhaps hidden were revealed. Some of the ideas were byproducts of this debate. Actually, this kind of clash between opinions result into some other new opinion. So it was the catalyst. It was the way opinions iterate and knowledge to be advanced and taken on to different levels. Because a great majority of these debates were done in topics that perhaps were hypothetical. And then these hypothetical ideas later on became realities. And, I would use a metaphor. It's almost like, when people in the 70s or 60s, 70s and 80s, they used to watch science fiction movies. And they thought that these things would never happen. And then they find that in the 90s and after 2000, things that were actually they thought to be science fiction and they would never occur, now they see it happen. Well, it's a similar idea. That hypothetical situations that they used to debate became later on realities. So that was a benefit. So Imam Al-Ghazali is saying, I know you might say this, and I agree. It did have that benefit, but that doesn't make it good. And this is a crucial notion in here. Because Imam Al-Ghazali here says, we are not pragmatic. And actually, he quotes the Prophet ﷺ how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may support the religion with people who in actuality are not necessarily religious. Actually, the Prophet ﷺ has also said that perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may direct people to the truth not through the Quran but through the Sultan or the use of force. This is an actual things that are actually witnessed throughout history. People are not necessarily taken, or they don't necessarily walk to the truth or accept the truth by mere persuasion. Sometimes, in some cases, different methods of force. I'm not necessarily talking about physical force, but people are sometimes forced to believe in the truth, not necessarily because they were convinced. Some people go to paradise and their hands and feet are tangled. Because they became Muslims after they were war prisoners. When they were war prisoners, they had to be tangled, right? So when they had to be tangled, they experienced Islam then. Otherwise, they would not, from themselves, they would not come to it. And this is a hadith from Sahih Bukhari, and actually also is a hikmah in the hikmah al-Ata'iyya. It has that meaning. That people, when they don't come by blessings, they would come to God by hardships. So the same thing. People would not come by the Quran, they would come by force. You don't want to be convinced, you don't want words, you can come by different methods of force. So Imam Al-Ghazali is saying the same thing. He's saying, well, did force then become in actuality good? Not necessarily, but it had good results, and this is part of life. In other words, Imam Al-Ghazali is separating what is part of fate, what is part of qadr, and what is part of right or wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained in terms of fate that some people would reap fruits out of something like force. That does not make force to be a good thing. Alright? Not because it had good results would make it in itself something that we are called to apply. This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created by fate. But at the same time, we're ordained to follow the rules. You get the point? Do I say that again? Okay? Yes, say it again, or say it, okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could ordain things to happen in terms of fate. For example, there are certain effects, results, byproducts, things that happen that are beneficial. But these beneficial things happened because of something bad. Okay? They were taken as war prisoners, and then they become Muslim. Becoming Muslim is good for them, but being a war prisoner is not something to be happy about. Okay? So, and that does not mean that we're supposed to take people as war prisoners since it worked before. We're not commanded to take people as war prisoners so we can be happy with them that they became Muslim. We're not commanded to do this. You understand? So, some bad things, because of the lutf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, can result into something from a certain aspect. When you see it from a certain aspect, you see it as something beneficial for the person. A clear example, a person who goes through a hardship of illness, of suffering, and because of that experience, he learns to be resilient, and become and perseveres, and develops character. And this is something seen actually in countries or places in the world that involve wars or things of that sort. Even though the children suffer, but then you'd find it later on when they grow up, some of them do prosper because they developed resilience and perseverance evolved from these situations. On the other hand, those who live in very, very rich communities, they suffer from depression because they're bored. See? That does not mean that we should create wars so people become resilient. You understand? Okay, now we get the point. So this is what Imam Al-Ghazali is saying. Debates are bad, they advance knowledge. Debating in that way is harmful because of the reasons that he will mention. These debates are harmful to your religiosity, to your tadayyun, to your spiritual self. But they were, something good came out of them for knowledge, for academia, for science. Imam Ghazali is saying, yeah, I concur. Yes, it did bring something positive. Just like when you become ill and you're hurt, and And because of that illness, you develop good character. Well, good character is something good. Does not mean we should go and seek to be ill and sick in order to develop that. Okay, now you understand it? So this is Imam Al-Ghazali, what Imam Al-Ghazali is saying. He's trying to separate what becomes good out of the predestination of fate that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained in this world. Put this on one hand, and on the other hand, the legal aspects, right and wrong, halal and haram. Okay? So, which here's the moral philosophy of Imam Al-Ghazali here is very present. That he's saying, not that it works, not that it's good, then it will be halal, that it will be permissible. Here Imam Al-Ghazali is obviously against being pragmatic. But actually, if something is good, then it's good in itself regardless of the outcome. And vice versa as well. Okay, Imam Al-Ghazali then goes to say that you celebrate debates, you embrace this method of intellectual competition, and you say that you do this for the sake of grasping or coming about to find the truth in matters of religion. And you would say that you're doing this because the companions used to do this. They used to discuss things. Well, the companions and the pious predecessors before you had 8 conditions that they would have to apply, or they would used to be that they adhere to in times of debate. First, that a person who would involve in a debate or argument or religious discussion has to know that this discussion is a collective it's mandated collectively. In other words, it's fardu kifaya, not fardu ayn. It's not obligated on every single individual. Like, not every single Muslim has to be involved in debate, has to be involved in discussion, has to be involved into argument. But rather, it's a collective mandate. Alright. So, whoever will be involved in this must already have finished what is mandatory for him as an individual. In other words, if you as an individual, you still have to carry on some of the tasks and duties that are asked from you, and you're lagging behind. You were slacking off. You did not cover all the things that were already mandated on you as an individual case. Then, if this is the case, you should not be involved in these discussions or arguments. And this is obviously something that, if we want to do a comparative study of this is something that we actually see nowadays. You find a person, for example, who is perhaps is not observing prayer as the way he or she should be doing. And then he would come up and start having a discussion whether listening to music is halal or haram. Well, perhaps you need to know if it's halal or haram, but not through discussion though. So you find a person, and I remember when I was a freshman in college, I had somebody come up to me and say, he later on went to become an actor. But anyways, so he came up to me and says, Ahmed, is music halal or haram? So I told him, do you pray? He was like, no, I don't. I'm like, just pray first and then we can think about that later. So the idea is that there are priorities. If the person is lacking things that are necessary for him as an individual, should not be looking for the complementary issues for the group. Okay, number two, that the person involved in such debate should not find any other collective mandate more important than debating. In other words, only be involved in debate when it is the most important task for society. Otherwise, don't be involved in it. Okay, number three, that the person who's involved in debate or part of this intellectual debate should actually be a mujtahid. And what Imam Al-Ghazali means here by a mujtahid, someone who is specialized to the point where he does not stick to a certain school of thought or a certain opinion just because so and so said it. In other words, he has some kind of autonomy in his intellectual opinions. He is not adhering to a specific school of thought, but rather somebody who has an autonomy in his or her intellectuality. And Imam Al-Ghazali says we put this condition for one reason, because if he is a Shafi'i and he was doing a debate with somebody who's Hanafi, and the Hanafi has posed an argument that is so convincing to the Shafi'i, he might then try to get out of this situation rather than accept the truth, because he is mandated, he is confined or limited by his affiliation. So in other words, a person who is involved in these debates should not have any kind of sectarian affiliation, and to be in a level of specialization in his field or his area of knowledge that would give him the ability to maneuver from one opinion to another and not be restricted by fans and followers and things of that sort of a certain group over the other. And then the fourth issue is that a person, that debates are not supposed to be about imaginary things. In other words, it's either something that is already happening, we're trying to figure out what to do in something that already happened, or about to happen. But debates about things that may happen in, 1% chance or something, things of that sort are not, debate for these things are not really recommended, according to Imam Al-Ghazali. So in other words, debate things that are already happening or about to happen. Some of you may think, and this is what I will explain to you now, the reason of it is capitalism. Alright? That you find, if you say this to people, only debate things that are happening or about to happen, and don't debate things that are really, far away from happening, they start telling you, look, see, from these debates, we now went to space, right? We have space shuttles and spaceships, right? And space stations, and we send robots to other planets, and perhaps there is water in Mars, and, we still argue whether Pluto is part of the solar system or out of the solar system, and all these, interstellar stuff. And this is, all of this, we're reaping the benefit of debating things that back then you would have stopped us from doing. Back then, people like you used to tell us this is not important. Won't lead to anything beneficial. But see where we go now. All right. I'll show you I will act a debate. The response to this, well, yes, you went to space, right? And perhaps, like, I know India now is going to space, but yet you have thousands of people who are suffering from lack of food, lack of shelter, lack of good health. So we're spending billions and billions, we as humans, billions and billions and billions of dollars to go to Mars, yet millions of people are suffering from hunger, and perhaps sometimes we can't find medicine, and this medicine is never subsidized because it's being sold by international multinational corporation who won't hinder the financial benefits of their stakeholders. See? So yes, you went to space, that's great. But what happened to the current problems that you actually have? So this is something to think about. On the other hand, these people might respond back, and they tell you, well, because of these hypothetical discussions, we ended up inventing technologies, that these technologies, and this is actually true, in some aspects, were then used in different applications and implementations in medicine and in healthcare, for example. But see, again, the response would be, see how much money and time you had to spend in order to go to space, right? And then by chance, you found out that the technology you use to go to space and do space exploration, by chance, you found out that some of these technologies can be useful in healthcare. What about if you had spent that same amount of time and that same amount of money in healthcare to begin with? Okay? I'm just telling you this because I know some people, when they would hear us say that Imam Al-Ghazali is calling us to only debate things that are happening or about to happen, some people may ridicule him and say, look, reality says that by having these, fancy discussions that may sound to you really absurd, it resulted into very great inventions of mankind. Well, one of the great inventions of mankind is that human beings are trying to go to another planet when other human beings are just dying because they don't have food. Is this an invention that we should celebrate as humans? I don't know. I don't know then going to space is really something that important when you find people who are suffering from not being able to be admitted to a hospital or very basic healthcare services. Anyways, the fifth condition, Imam Ghazali says, is that the person would rather have the debate in private than in public. And I guess the reason for this is obvious. Okay, because the debate then is for seeking the truth rather than competing who's better and who's not, who's popular and who isn't. And number 6, that a person would be involved in this debate or argument as if he's somebody looking for something. He doesn't really care if he finds it on his own, he finds it himself, or somebody else finds it for him. In other words, we're looking for the truth. If I find it, great. If you find it, then great as well. Thank God that we actually found it. Alright? And number 7, that the person should not embrace or use debating method just to win the debate. In other words, debating methods should be used in order to extract the truth, to understand, to extract understanding. Not to use debating methods as, like a way to, it's like a boxing game. Alright, so you say this, well, I will say back. And if you ask this, I will respond back. And then the eighth condition that Imam Al-Ghazali says, which is the final condition, that only debate somebody whom you would expect that he would benefit from the debate. Otherwise, don't debate the person. People never listen to this. And this is why in the 8th century, Imam Taqiyuddin al-Subki, I believe, used to say that debates, when you do debating, never expect the person that you're debating to come in the end and say to declare you as a winner if you actually win. Never expect the person you debate to declare you as a winner. And this is actually why in methods of debating later on, you would say, if you reach a point where the person you're debating doesn't say anything anymore, then you stop there. Don't keep hitting. Actually, this is for your benefit, because when you keep hitting, the person will use your weakest parts of the following hits, and then will come back into the game, into the debate. But if you reach a point where the person stops, he doesn't have anything to say back or answer back, he doesn't have to tell you, I lost. This is enough. He doesn't have an answer. Done. Don't keep going like, well, come on, what's your answer? Do you have something else to say? Well, if you keep doing that, he will have something else to say. Imam Al-Ghazali, the foundation of his opinion here comes from what? Comes from the verse in the Quran. ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم. ادع means what? Call. ادع إلى سبيل ربك. Call for the path of your Lord. بالحكمة, by wisdom. وَالْمَوْعِظَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ, by good preaching. Alright? Call. And then, وَجَادِلْهُمْ is debate them or argue against them. See, note something. Ud'u is what? Is a verb, is a command. إِلَى سَبِيلِ رَبِّكَ بِالْحِكْمَةِ, by wisdom and by good preaching. وَجَادِلْهُمْ, and argue against them, or debate them. Now debate is also a command. So, as Imam Al-Ghazali is saying, debating is not part of the calling. Debating is not part of the calling. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ادْعُ إِلَى سَبِيلِ رَبِّكَ بِالْحِكْمَةِ وَالْمَوْعِظَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ. وَجَادِلْهُمْ, they say that جادلهم in Arabic, and I might have difficulty in translating grammatical terms here. But they say this عطف وجادلهم. Are we saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, call people by these three methods, wisdom, good preaching, and debate? Or is he saying, call people by wisdom and good preaching and debate? So they're two separate doings, not the same one. And if there's two separate doings, that would get debating out of calling people, out of persuading people. Actually, debate then can be considered calling people, but an indirect way. How is that? When you debate a person you are seeking to persuade his followers, but not him. You understand? You're seeking to persuade his followers, but you don't seek that that person would actually believe. And you can see this with the prophets. Peace and blessings be upon them. Sayyidina Ibrahim, Sayyidina Musa, Fir'aun, they're not necessarily seeking, perhaps. Well, of course, in the beginning they do call them to believe. But then there's a point where when the situation gets hostile and they start a debate with the prophets then respond, they retaliate, but not to call them anymore. Okay? So وَجَادِلُهُمْ becomes more or less is a verbal defense for the belief, for faith. Okay. Of course, Imam Al-Ghazali went on after that to talk about what we call the negative byproducts of debating. So he mentions from them envy, for example. He mentions praising oneself. He mentions ghiba, because might sometimes in debates that would involve that you speak about other people, whether before or after the debates, or maybe during, you speak down on people. So there are negative byproducts to debating. And also he mentions hypocrisy, he mentions riyat, just pretty much showing off. And then before we finish, before we finish this section, I need to stop at 2 or 3 sentences that Imam Al-Ghazali has mentioned at the end of this section. One, he says, I would say it in Arabic, I have to say this in Arabic because it's beautiful in Arabic. He says, العلم لا يهمل العالم. Knowledge never leaves the scholar or the knowledgeable. What does he mean by that? Never lets the knowledgeable alone. Knowledge would never leave you alone. Once acquired, it would never leave you alone. بل يهلكه هلاك الأبد أو يحييه حياة الأبد. Actually, or rather, it would either lead to eternal punishment or eternal reward. How is that? Because again, it comes to the notion that knowledge is an opportunity, and every opportunity is a risk. So knowledge, on one hand, is an opportunity. You take knowledge, you apply it, you spread it, you disseminate it, you help people with it. Well, and you don't show off. You don't see yourself as better than others. You help them out. Okay, so this is an eternal reward. You take knowledge as a prestige, as a way to look down on people, as a way to show off. Then it will be a reason for eternal punishment. So knowledge would never leave you alone, would never let you alone. You acquire knowledge, so it's over. No. There is a responsibility. Once you know, you become responsible. That's why you find some people, when they're told secrets or they're told things, you find them saying, why did you tell me? Because now they're obliged. Once you know, you have to act. And you will either act positively or negatively. So it would never be the same. But perhaps before you would know, you would not be asked to do anything. But now you know. So it becomes a responsibility or an opportunity also. On the other hand, it becomes a risk. That if you don't meet up whatever duty of that knowledge, then it will be a risk, not an opportunity. The second sentence is actually, I already mentioned that, sorry, which is the idea that Imam Al-Ghazali says, we do understand that debating does have benefit, but that does not mean we would call people to all become debaters, call people that debating is something that is spiritually beneficial. And then he says, طالب الرياسة في نفسه هالك. The person who seeks to be above others is perished. وقد يصبح بسببه غيره إن كان يدعو إلى ترك الدنيا. In other words, he is a person who seeks to be in a very high regard. This person is perished, even if he calls people to leave the dunya and he helps them out and things of that sort. Okay? So he could be means to a good end, but he does not benefit himself from it. A final word about this section, because what some of you might get out of this section, that Imam Al-Ghazali here is saying that we should never have academic debates, we should never have intellectual debates. But what I want you to keep in mind, and now we'll contextualize what he's saying. Imam Al-Ghazali is not talking about formal, respectful debates that take place in academic journals. He's not talking about this. Okay. He is not necessarily talking about debates that take place in schools, for example, or courses or classes that train people to become better in arguments. He's not necessarily talking about this either. But what he's talking about, debates that revolve around meanings of authority, power, influence, desire, worldly gain. These are the debates that Imam Al-Ghazali is condoning. These are the debates that Imam Al-Ghazali is warning us from. But otherwise, Imam Al-Ghazali himself, in his other books, used to argue against other opinions. And he would say, I don't believe this, not believe that, and the Shafi'i here is correct, and the Hanafi here is not correct. He would used to say that in his books. So he is not necessarily talking about academic debate when it takes place in a very formal, rigorous, respectful, abides by a code of conduct. A code of conduct. He's not talking about this, but rather what he's warning us from, the debates that perhaps sometimes you find in television that would seek publicity and seek public opinion and followers and who won and who did not and things of that sort. Or debates that would revolve around meanings of authority or power, or who is better than other, or who will get a benefit and who won't, who will get a gain out of this debate or not. It should be done merely for the sake of knowledge. If it's done in that way, Imam Al-Ghazali does not look down on it. Because see, there are two types of, even in the West, we find two types of debates. You find political debates, like the presidential debates, okay? And this is obviously, I guess you could know what is the opinion of Imam Al-Ghazali in this, right? And there are debates that are being held at universities, for example. where you find two scholars from two different schools in a certain area of knowledge. They go up, they present their arguments, they answer questions, they take time to respond against each other and things of that sort, in order to help the attendees, the listeners, those who attend the debate, create a better idea of the two opposing opinions in one aspect. Okay? This is not necessarily bad. Okay? Unless it becomes more or less of a cheering competition, who gets more claps than others. But all in all, it is something perhaps that is useful. Unfortunately, you find in the Middle East and in the Arab world, they turn religious debates into more of a segment in a talk show. Okay, so they have like a segment for 30 minutes, 40 minutes. They would bring like two people to keep just arguing back and forth. And perhaps all they do is just bigotry and calling names and ad hominem and all different sorts of false methods of debating, just to get more viewers, more followers to the channel, more advertisements and things of that nature. This is something that Imam Al-Ghazali perhaps is talking about. He's talking about something similar of that. So he's not talking about debating that are present in books or academic journals or even debates that take place in classes or universities. But he's rather talking about, again, debate that would involve the accomplishment, the gain of the aforementioned issues: authority, power, money, position. Imam Al-Ghazali then goes on to, in section 5, goes on to speak about آداب المتعلم والعالم. Some people translate this as etiquettes of the scholar or the teacher and the learner or the student. And what Imam Al-Ghazali here is talking about is not necessarily the word, or not necessarily the topic of etiquette in terms of that these are cultural etiquette. When we say etiquette here, or adab, we don't mean it's something that is symbolic in a cultural context, or something that is has a personal preference aspect. So this is not this is not the preferred way to do things from the opinion of Imam Al-Ghazali. This is the preferred etiquette. This understanding is false. The correct understanding of adab is pretty much the methodology of teaching and learning. Okay? For example, and I'll give you an example of this usage of the word adab or adab. That adab is sometimes the method. The word adab sometimes would mean etiquette, and sometimes it would mean method. And a method, then it's specific, then it's detailed, then it is not something of a mere preference, but rather something that has either been experienced, either been proved, accepted by a majority. It's not a method is something different than a mere etiquette. A method is a way you do something. In other words, if you do it differently, then it will be wrong. But an etiquette, well, this is my preferred way. If you do it differently, that's your own culture, that's your own preference. Okay? So adab is sometimes it would refer to etiquette, sometimes it would refer to methodology. There is a alim, his name is Hamid al-Ghifari, and he was in the 9th century. he wrote a short treatise called رسالة في آداب المطالعة. Okay, if we translate this, it will be a treatise in the etiquette of deep reading, or etiquettes of the art of pursuing scholarly works. But then you find him at the end of this treatise, he says, وَاللَّهُ الْهَادِي إِلَى طَرِيقِ الْمُطَالَعَةِ. Tariq is a path, and it would mean method. Because we say in modern Arabic, tariqa, or even also classical Arabic, tariqa. Tariqa, it would mean the way. The way, in other words, is the method, the process of doing something. And this treatise was then copied with minor changes and minor additions by a Yemeni scholar. His name is Abdullah bin Hussein bin Faqih Afifuddin radiyallahu anhu. He is from the 11th or 12th century. And he called the chapter of his book that involved these etiquettes that people might call etiquettes, he actually called it Al-Muqaddimah fi Bayani Tariq al-Mutala'a, the introduction in showing the way of deep reading. And all these are indicators that when Hamid al-Ghifari radiallahu anhu al-Allama, when he said رسالة في آداب المطالعة, a treatise in آداب المطالعة, it was more or less a treatise in the method of deep reading, not the etiquette. Okay? And there was a short, actually it was a page long essay, so to speak, or also short manual written by a alim, his name, or a sheikh, his name is Shuja'. That's all I know of him. It was written almost in the 12th or 13th century. It was written almost 200 years ago or more. And it is also in the same subject. And it's called أسلوب مطالعة الكتاب. 200 years ago, they used to say this. أسلوب مطالعة الكتاب. The way of reading a book. These manuscripts, by the way, I have, inshallah, you guys will, perhaps you can find the printed book at the Cairo Book Festival this coming January, inshallah. Okay, so back to what we're talking about. آداب العالم والمتعلم are not necessarily the etiquette of the teacher and the etiquette of the student, but rather the method, the way of being a teacher and the way of being a student. Okay? And when we see it as such, as the way, as the method, it becomes a tradition, not a mere etiquette. There has been a book that I've been working on so far, and hopefully, inshallah, it will, if I finish some of the editing things that are remaining. Even though it has been sent to the publisher, but they returned it back to me to fix some things. Imam Ibn Khaldun in Al-Muqaddimah, he wrote a chapter or a section in which he talks about the best way of instruction, of giving instruction. So I wanted to do I took that part of Al-Muqaddimah, and then I did research in the books of Adab Talib al-Ilm, or Adab al-Alim wal-Muta'allim, especially the part about Adab al-Alim, because the section is about the best way of instruction, the best way of teaching. And what I tried to do in that book is to say that what Imam Ibn Khaldun has been saying in the 7th and 8th century Hijri time is pretty much the same that was said in the 3rd, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th centuries as well. Whether the person is Shafi'i, Hanafi, Maliki, Ash'ari, philosopher, muhaddith, faqih, bringing all quotations from different scholars, from different backgrounds, saying the same thing. Okay? So whatever is mentioned here, almost, and also it's what they say is almost also exactly the same as Imam Al-Ghazali is saying here in the Book of Knowledge. And we can come to conclude that there is a discipline for the method of teaching and the method of learning in Islam. I wouldn't see that adab al-alim wal-muta'allim as the etiquettes. I would see it as the way, as the method, as the process. And this process has been actually studied, and it has a tradition. And sometimes they would disagree about certain things. Like, for example, perhaps we will elaborate about it later on. They would disagree, for example, about whether to study more than one discipline at the same time or not. Should a student mix between 2 or 3 disciplines, as it would happen nowadays in colleges, where you take 5 courses, 5 different subjects in a semester or in a year long? Would that be acceptable or not? 2 opinions actually in the tradition of Islam. Okay, and last thing to say is here, this area, the Imam al-Nawawi radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in the introduction of his book Al-Majmu', he dedicated the introduction for this topic, the method of teaching and the method of learning. And in the beginning of that introduction, he said that he will only mention in this introduction, by the way, the Al-Majmu' is a multi-volumes book. It's not like 2 or 3 volumes. I can't remember the exact number, but we're talking about 10 volumes, more or less. Imam Al-Ghazali, Imam Al-Nawawi did not finish Al-Majmu', but we're talking about a solid 6 or 7, perhaps, volumes that he finished of that book. Imam Al-Nawawi, in the beginning of that book, in the introduction, he says that I will have this intro to be about the method of learning and teaching, and I will put into this introduction only 1/10 of what I have compiled in this area. He says, because the book cannot handle more than this. Okay? So he puts it 1/10. By the way, Muqaddimatul Majmu', the introduction of Al-Majmu' by Imam Nawawi, sometimes is almost considered like it could be a book on its own, like Al-Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun. Because Al-Muqaddimah Ibn Khaldun was also an introduction to a bigger book. So Al-Muqaddimah by Imam Nawawi, sometimes the scholars would give a course in Al-Muqaddimah only. They would say, we'll give a course in Al-Muqaddimah just to explain the method of teaching and learning, and also just to give you an overview of a Shafi'i madhab, of the most important terminologies and things of that sort, just to give you an understanding of the madhab. Okay? But they won't indulge into reading Al-Majmu' itself. They will only take Al-Muqaddimah and give a course in it. So that, Imam Nawawi, when you try to do that, go to Al-Muqaddimah, see how many pages, how many aspects he discusses in terms of the way of teaching, the way of learning, and you have to know this. Whatever is mentioned there, multiplied by 10, this is what Imam Nawawi had compiled in that area. Okay? Which says that this area of knowledge is pretty much vast. Imam Al-Ghazali, in that 5th section, he starts by adab al-muta'allim. And he mentioned out of these what he called wadha'if. Wadha'if are duties. So he says the student has many duties, but they can be summarized into 10 duties, 10 main duties. Anything else outside of these 10 can somewhat be under one of these. Alright? The first duty, he said, تقديم طهارة النفس عن رذائل الأخلاق. In other words, he should put first the moral upbringing before the acquiring of knowledge. Okay? That morals and ethics should become first before knowledge. And he says something that is very nice. He says, إِذِ الْعِلْمُ عِبَادَةُ الْقَلْبِ. He says, knowledge is the worship of the heart. And this is very interesting. Because worship, ibadah, we always think of the word ibadah as something that we do physically. And it involves a movement. Right? And here he says al-qalb, and he means the mind. And the mind, when the mind thinks, you would find that philosophers, they compare the thinking of the mind to a movement of an object, going back and forth. Because they use two metaphors. One of them, see, when for example, when they're explaining what is al-fikr, thinking, they say harakatu dhihn, the movement of the mind from two premises, for example, to reach a conclusion. It's like you're moving from one premise to another to reach a conclusion, from one piece of information to another to get the result. It's almost you're physically tracing something. Okay? So they call al-fikr, thinking, they call it the movement of the mind. From whatever knowledge you have to the knowledge you want to acquire. Okay? You find somebody who's a person who explained, who's one of the scholars who wrote explanations on Aristotle's book of physics, called Yahya ibn Adi, an Arab philosopher. So, and he calls at-ta'allum, he says it's not mere listening to the teacher, but rather the movement that evolves in the mind of the student, then teaching and learning occurs. If that happens, this is an indicator that teaching and learning has occurred. Otherwise, it may occur, it may seem that it happened, but it did not happen. So until the student experiences a movement in the mind, but they don't mean a physical movement. Your mind won't actually physically move. Okay? So here Imam Al-Ghazali says that al-ilmu ibadatul qalb. There is a movement, but it's a movement in the mind. But then he says, so knowledge is the movement of the heart or movement of the mind. Just like how prayer is the movement of the limbs, right? Physical movement. But since you cannot do the physical movement of the limbs before you do wudu, so you can, at the same time, you should not be doing the intellectual movement before you clean the mind. And how you clean the mind? How do you do that? By what he calls al-tathir, or purification. And here the purification is from the sins, is from the bad behaviors, desires of worldly life, things of that nature. And actually you find scholars of logic, like for example an Indian scholar, his name is his title was Bahr al-Ulum, Abu Ayyash al-Laknawi. He has an explanation of, he wrote an explanation on Sulam al-Ulum, which is a treatise in Mantiq. It was a very famous treatise, very famous manual in logic, which Sheikh Hassan al-Attar, rahimahullah ta'ala, Sheikh al-Azhar, when it reached him, when he got a copy of that book, he said that he praised the Indians, how they are very much involved and advanced into the art of logic, and how many of the Arabs and scholars in Egypt did not witness to see a book like that. So Bahr al-Ulum, in his explanation of Sulam al-Ulum, the book, at the end, he was explaining the recommendations of scholars of logic about how to train yourself to have better reasoning and not fall into sophistry. How to do that. And he gave the practical training, practical recommendations, things that you should watch out for when you do the reasoning. And then he goes, but the real way to abstain from committing mistakes in reasoning is the Sufi Riyadha, which is the Sufi meditation. He says this is the real way to get out of that. Because when you're thinking about an idea, as much as the mind is looking to acquire the truth, at the same time, desire competes with the mind to kind of take your thinking in a different direction. Sometimes you yourself, you have an intention to seek the truth, but then you find desire is calling you to tweak things a little bit and to misguide you to believe in other ideas that perhaps are false. All in all, what Imam Al-Ghazali is saying here, that a student, before he goes into reasoning and thinking and arguing and debating or learning different sciences and getting to know terminologies and be an academic, before you do that, you need to carry on an ethical or a moral, go through a moral upbringing or an ethical upbringing. And some of our shuyukh, or they used to say that if you teach fiqh to a thief, you're helping him to steal. How's that? It's almost teaching a thief also, or a corrupt person, you're teaching him the law. Laws have gaps. So you're teaching him all the rukhas, all the permissions, all the gaps, so he would know how to steal, but then make it look legal. Alright? So you don't teach the thief, because you would then be helping him. And also Shaykh Zarruq radiallahu ta'ala anhu says that the person who has an evil heart, or a person who has his soul is controlled by desires, he would take knowledge and mold it according to his desires. It says knowledge is usually molded according to the self, to the soul. So if a person has a good soul, knowledge will be put in a good mold. A person has a bad soul, knowledge will be molded in a bad form as well. So knowledge takes the mold of the heart. Look of the heart as a vessel. Look of the mind as a vessel. It's a clean vessel, so knowledge won't be contaminated. If it's a dirty vessel, whatever knowledge you put in the mind, you're contaminating that knowledge as well. And would only take, and that person would then only take from knowledge what supports the desires, what supports his or her whims, not what supports the benefit or what is truthful or what is correct in itself. Of course, this has other applications. Not that the person would see knowledge or would view things in the correct way, in the way it should be. That's why in the dua, Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan. We want to see the truth as it is. وَالْبَاطِلْ بَاطِلًا. And see the false as it is. And in terms of al-haqq, وَارْزُقْنَا اتِّبَاعَهُ. And grant us following that truth. And in terms of falsehood, وَارْزُقْنَا اجْتِنَابَهُ. Being abstained from it. This is not the only application. Another application is that a person who did not go through that purification of the soul, he might use knowledge for money, for example. And this is why Imam al-Zarnuji, rahimahullah ta'ala, in Ta'lim al-Muta'allim, he says, they used to learn a craft before they used to learn a science. So when they have a craft, there's a... Don't worry, it won't hurt you. Cockroach. Now it's live. Okay. So Imam al-Zarnuji used to say that they used to learn a craft before they would learn a science. And the reason is, when they go to learn a science, they would not ask people for their money. When they go to acquire knowledge, they won't ask people for money. But rather, they have more of an independent financial existence. They don't need money from people. So then, they won't look for compliments from people, they won't look for any kind of reward. They say what they believe, because they don't need anything from anybody else. This is what a scholar is supposed to be. A scholar won't be in need for people. Once a scholar is in need for people, people tend to serve their needs. So if the need is met by people, then the scholar becomes not a servant of knowledge, but rather a servant of the people. And people follow their desires. So the scholar would then in turn become a servant of people's desires. Okay. So this is another reason why he mentioned this particular duty in the beginning. Because it is the way, by following this duty, this particular duty, it's the way you keep seeking knowledge for the sake of knowledge, not for the sake of anything else. If a person does not purify the soul, would either seek knowledge for his or her own desires, or for something like desires like, perhaps sometimes it's intellectual desires. People sometimes study things just to prove other people wrong, or to prove that they were correct in a certain situation. It's not necessarily that they will get money from it. Another reason is that they could get money. A third reason that we get prestige or position. So this is the first wadifa that Imam Al-Ghazali radiallahu anhu started with. Okay. We can take one more and then we stop. And then he mentioned the second wadifa, or the second duty. And he says he should decrease his attachments with the dunya and decrease his attachments with family and society. And you might think, what does he mean by that? So he says in Arabic, وَيَبْعُدُ, not decrease his attachments, I apologize, perhaps I mistranslated. But he says, he goes far from family and home. Okay? Not to detach, but rather be physically far from them. And this has been mentioned in in Al-Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun. It was also mentioned by Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi in his book Al-Jami'. And it was definitely mentioned in Ta'lim al-Muta'allim. But in these first two books that I mentioned, in Al-Jami' by Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, or in Jami' ibn Abdullah, one of those two, and also Al-Muqaddimah. Why did they used to travel for knowledge? الرحلة في طلب العلم. Why did they used to travel? Why do they travel abroad? Like many of you guys, why do you travel? And Ibn Khaldun and others, they mentioned that the reason for this is that the person, when he travels, leaves home, leaves family, he's only attached to knowledge. Once you're home, you're always obliged to carry on duties that are related to the family, to the society. Sometimes, because of the political situation, you're very much concerned about what's happening in your country. Sometimes your mind gets so involved into the details of people around you because you know them. But when you go to another country, you become a foreigner. And when you become a foreigner, you don't know what's going on in politics. You don't know what's going on necessarily in economics, either in the financial reality of that country. You don't know about any kind of cultural issues. You're out any kind of societal argument that's taking place. You're not really part of it. Okay, you're going there for a reason. Okay, you're not coming to that country to solve their